Welcome to this explainer. Today we're actually going to time travel a bit. We're going way back to 16th century statecraft and, believe it or not, we're going to translate it directly into a highly relevant, super pragmatic playbook for navigating modern corporate competition. It's a wild ride, so let's dive right in.
Look at this quote. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few really know what you are. This incredibly cold observation on perception, reality, and power by Niccolo Machiavelli is our starting point today. It's an ice-cool leadership principle from 500 years ago, and you know what? It absolutely still reverberates in every high-stakes boardroom right now.
I mean, when you hear the word Machiavellian, what pops into your head? You probably think of the classic dictionary definition, right? A pejorative term suggesting serpentine scheming and using completely immoral, ruthless means to get what you want, usually just holding on to power at all costs. But is that actually the whole story? Let's address this myth head-on.
Because actually, scratch that. The real man behind the myth paints a totally different picture. As scholar Mauricio Viaroli points out in his biography, Niccolo's Smile, Machiavelli was in reality a caring, sensitive diplomat. He was just living in incredibly chaotic, violent times, and he simply wrote as a realist. He understood the brutal, sometimes ugly necessities of maintaining stability, when everything around you is literally falling apart.
And honestly, that is exactly why his work endures today. Think about it. The 16th century political landscape heavily mirrors the 21st century boardroom. Both are highly competitive, often ruthless arenas that absolutely require unsentimental realism if you want to survive. To ignore reality and try to live up to some imagined perfect ideal, as Machiavelli argued, that usually just ends in failure. You've got to deal with the world as it actually is.
Moving into our first section, Princes of the Boardroom. Let's see exactly how these 16th century tactics translate to today.
Just consider the direct translation between these two worlds. It's practically a one-to-one match. The historical prince, that's today's CEO. The state, that's your corporation. And those hired mercenaries that Machiavelli was always warning about, yeah, those are your modern consultants and contractors. And war, well, that is simply market competition. The tactical rules of engagement haven't changed one bit. Literally, only the vocabulary has.
So, knowing that, an absolutely crucial point is how a modern leader actually builds their inner circle. Machiavelli wrote, "The first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him." He explicitly advised leaders to run far away from flatterers and sycophants. Instead, strong executives must surround themselves with capable people who are fully empowered to tell the hard truth without causing offense. It really boils down to this: weak leaders have weak lieutenants, while strong leaders employ the absolute best. Which brings us to one of his most famous and honestly brilliant metaphors, the fox and the lion. This is all about adapting to survive. He wrote, "One must therefore be a fox to recognize traps and a lion to frighten wolves. A modern CEO simply cannot afford to be one-dimensional anymore. In business, you desperately need the fox's cunning to identify those complex market traps, hidden risks, and subtle consumer shifts. But you also need the lion's absolute raw strength to fend off aggressive competitors and hostile takeovers. You literally have to be both to survive." So what does this strategic adaptation look like day to day? Well, leaders have to constantly alter their conduct with the times to ensure ongoing success. In our insanely fast-paced climate, this means fully embracing digital and international competition. It means devouring information, reading widely just to sharpen the mind, and then crucially, moving forward with absolute resolve. As Machiavelli said, the wise man does it once, what the fool does finally. You have to act to avoid analysis paralysis. And that requirement to adapt brings us to our next concept, strategic alliances and enemies. Because survival often requires entirely conquering the status quo. Just listen to this incredibly sharp, dispassionate confidence. I'm not interested in preserving the status quo. I want to overthrow it. Wow, true leaders respect the existing order, sure, but they want to leave a real legacy. They want to make a dent in the universe. And doing that requires a ruthless, clear-eyed assessment of who your friends and enemies really are. Welcome to the modern battlefield of alliances. As Machiavelli noted ages ago, your enemies may sometimes become your greatest friends. Sound familiar? Just look at the digital market. Big data analytics are completely blurring traditional industry lines. Today, CEOs are entering into agile collaborations and partnering with former fierce competitors. Why? All to penetrate new markets and generate completely untested, wild business models. But let's be real, overhauling the system is no walk in the park. Machiavelli warned there is nothing more difficult to take in hand than to take the lead from the introduction to a new order of things. This 500-year-old observation perfectly describes the perilous reality of modern corporate mergers and acquisitions. The sheer upheaval, the massive clash of centralized versus decentralized structures. It is fraught, it's uncertain, and it absolutely tests the limits of an executive's capability.
Which leads us to our final core theme: foresight and financial horizons. Let's look at how playing the long game impacts concrete financial decisions today.
A wise prince, never in peaceful times, stands idle, but increases his resources, that they may be available to him in adversity. You know what that means? Complacency destroys organizations, period. True leaders anticipate market decline, and they act during times of massive success, violently rejecting the urge to just stand idle. But here's the twist. How executives psychologically perceive that future adversity varies in a super fascinating way.
Okay, let me introduce you to an amazing concept from recent academic research out of the University of Kent: future tense reference, or FTR. So this is a linguistic feature where the obligatory marking of future events in a language actually impacts a speaker's psychological distance from the future. Basically, the literal language a CEO speaks on a daily basis functions as their financial map. It dictates how close or how far away tomorrow's problems feel to them. Mind-blowing, right?
So this linguistic divide creates two totally distinct mindsets. On one side, we have weak FTR languages. For these speakers, the future feels temporarily close, which creates a really strong long-term orientation with less psychological distance. On the flip side, strong FTR languages make the future feel way off in the distance, leading to a much more short-term orientation with a heavy emphasis on quick, immediate results. Here's where the rubber meets the road, how this actually plays out in the boardroom, specifically with really complex accounting choices like goodwill impairment. Now, if you aren't an accountant, goodwill impairment is essentially just corporate speak for admitting an asset you bought is now worth way less and taking a painful financial hit on your books. The data shows that executives speaking weak FTR languages with their long-term focus recognize that impairment immediately. They see the future consequences crystal clear. But strong FTR speakers, they delay it. They delay impairment recognition, overstating short-term earnings just to avoid an immediate stock drop.
But as the research points out, and honestly, as Machiavelli would undoubtedly agree, manipulation is just a short-term band-aid that ultimately throws good money after a bad investment. Delaying these necessary write-downs just to appease short-term goals, it completely ignores reality. And it absolutely violates the core Machiavellian principle of actually preparing for adversity and maintaining strong, truthful foundations.
So how do we actually cultivate this pragmatic foresight? It takes real, actionable discipline. Rule 1. Rely on internal capabilities, not just wealth or bot loyalty. Rule 2. You have to maintain agile financial models while you're successful, not when it's too late. Rule 3. Anticipate market declines way before they happen. And above all, Rule 4. View business reality completely without emotion or moralizing. True power isn't bought. It is built on solid, realistic foundations.
All right, as we wrap up, let's crystallize all this into the executive playbook. It's ultimately about effectiveness over emotion.
You know, Machiavelli gets a bad rap. He wasn't necessarily endorsing evil, he was just diagramming raw political and business survival. In business, just like in statecraft, success is a mindset that leads directly to actions and results. The modern business landscape demands a leader who is highly engaged, ruthlessly informed, present, and just unflinchingly realistic.
Which leaves us with one final, provocative question to really chew on. As you go out there and navigate the absolute chaos, the fierce competition, and the shifting alliances of the modern boardroom, are you the fox, the lion, or the prey? Think about it. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep your eyes open out there.